Good morning, everybody. Por favor, come on, Phoenix. Good morning, everybody. ¿Qué pasó? I mean, I know it's Monday. My name is Javier Palomares, and I'm the President and CEO of the United States Hispanic Business Council. We are the leading advocate for the 4.5 million Hispanic-owned companies in this country that collectively contribute over $850 billion to the American economy every year. Our mission is to ensure these business builders, job creators, and taxpayers have a voice in the national dialogue. We promote policies and people that represent the breadth of our nation's diverse population, the future of our economy, and the changing face of America. Thank you for joining us for this discussion about Arizona's economy, its border, and its role in American politics. Our program will begin with a panel of experts, including border security experts, an agricultural executive, and a seasoned industry leader. Following the panel, we will have a chat with United States Senator Kyrsten Sinema, a champion of the small business and Hispanic communities, where we will widen the dialogue to include not only aspects of Arizona's politics, but matters of national importance. A special thanks to our friends at the Border Security Alliance, the Western Growers Association, Boehringer Ingelheim Pharmaceuticals, the Arizona Corporation Commission, and Senator Sinema's wonderful staff for helping us bring this program to you. And also to Arizona State for allowing us to use this beautiful setting. As they say in these parts, I think it's fear the fork, I think is the way it goes. Without all of them, we would not be able to establish this dialogue, which becomes more critical with every passing moment. Lastly, thank you to all our friends in the media and other journalists for being here, helping us amplify our voice and the voice of our guests. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me thank all of our wonderful collaborators. Now, turning to our panel. Border security and our immigration system have a direct impact on our communities, our businesses, and frankly, our lives, especially in a state like Arizona. It's important that we create beneficial dialogue aimed at creating solutions rather than pushing political agendas. This is the only way to solve a problem that has for too long been ignored, or worse yet, manipulated by administration after administration on both sides of the aisle. We've seen way too much political theater and partisan politics, and we hope today's dialogue will shed a bit of light on this difficult situation, because we know that this is not a Republican issue, this is not a Democrat issue, this is an American challenge. Throughout our program, we will hear different perspectives from a variety of people who all have at least two things in common. First, they're all personally impacted by our nation's immigration and border policies, and second, they are experts in their respective fields. We are delighted to be joined by this amazing panel of leaders who volunteered their time, by the way, to help us tell your story of how this crisis is impacting you right here where you live. With that, let me introduce our panelists. The U.S.-Mexico border is one of the largest smuggling hubs of counterfeit goods, not just knockoff clothes, but critical goods like medicine. In fact, the market for counterfeit medicine is valued at over $432 billion annually. Tragically, fake medicines often end up in the hands of vulnerable populations right here in the U.S. To help us understand this challenge, we've asked Aaron Graham, an expert on this topic, to join us. Aaron is the Executive Director of Brand Safety and Security for Boehringer Ingelheim Pharmaceuticals. He directs anti-counterfeit investigations to ensure patient safety throughout our country. He works with law enforcement officials, prosecutors, and healthcare industry experts to protect all Americans. Before transitioning to the private sector, he began his federal law enforcement career as a special agent for the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, where he directed undercover investigations on counterfeit, illicit, and illegally diverted prescription medicines. By the way, he flew in on his own time just for this event. Y además, Aaron speaks Spanish better than most Latinos that I know. Aaron, please come up to your seat. Bienvenidos, caballero. Immigrants make up a significant amount of workers in cornerstone American industries like construction, hospitality, and agriculture. Like many states, Arizona relies heavily on agriculture to support its economy. To illustrate the connection between immigration, agriculture, and the economy, we've invited Jonathan Sarager of the Western Growers Association to the conversation. Jonathan is a Senior Director of Federal Government Affairs for Western Growers. He has been advocating for WGA members in Washington, D.C. in the areas of labor, food safety, and taxation. Jonathan spent several years on Capitol Hill at the Senate Judiciary Committee, the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and an Arizona congressional office. He earned his BS degree right here in Arizona State University and his Juris Doctorate from Texas Tech University. Jonathan, please take your seat, and welcome to the panel. According to the New American Economy, immigrants are playing critical roles in industries that are essential to keeping America running, including in specific fields like utilities and transportation. Uniquely, Arizona has a commission with responsibilities that go far beyond traditional public utilities regulation. Texas could learn from that. These include facilitating the incorporation of businesses, securities regulation, and railroad and pipeline safety. With that in mind, we have invited Commissioner Lea Marquez Peterson. In 2019, Lea was appointed to the Arizona Corporation Commission by Governor Ducey, making her the very first Hispanic woman to serve in a statewide office in the history of Arizona. I think that deserves a round of applause, by the way, Lea. Lea was later elected to the commission in 2020, where she still holds her seat and has even served as the chairwoman of that organization. Lea's entrepreneurial background spans from owning and operating her own businesses to supporting Arizona's small business community. In fact, just last year, Lea was recognized as the 2022 Hispanic Businesswoman of the Year by the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and she has earned many other accolades and awards for her leadership right here in Arizona. She holds degrees from the University of Arizona and Pepperdine University. Lea resides in Tucson with her family. Welcome to the panel, Lea. A key component to ensuring a functional and effective immigration system is enforcement, especially when it comes to human, drug, and illicit goods trafficking. Because of this, we have invited Jonathan Lines of the Border Security Alliance to bring that enforcement perspective to our discussion. Jonathan is the chairman of the BCA. He's also a Yuma County supervisor and a business owner. He has planned and executed dozens of briefings on border security and U.S.-Mexico border visits with governors, members of Congress, administration officials, business leaders, and law enforcement officers. He was appointed by Governor Ducey to the Arizona-Mexico Commission, which was critical in enhancing relations with Mexico. Bottom line, Jonathan has become a well-known and recognized border security expert. Raised in Yuma, his family has been in Arizona since the late 1800s, more or less when I was born. He also happens to speak Spanish fluently. Jonathan is married to Rosalie, and together they have 11 children. Bienvenidos, caballero. Together, our guests will tell the story of how our immigration system is impacting all of them and all of you right here in your community. Ladies and gentlemen, please, one more time, help me welcome all of them to the panel. Thank God I have Sabrina at my right hand. Am I live here? As we begin, I would like to remind everyone, please, that we are striving for authentic dialogue that can serve all of us. In that vein, I would like to ask everyone to remain considerate and respectful. We're not here to argue or to politicize any issue, but rather to hear from people on the front lines so that we can learn from those who truly know what is happening. With that, let's get started. I'll begin with you, Aaron. Aaron, we all hear about the illicit, illegal recreational drugs like fentanyl, heroin, and so forth flooding our borders. But you don't hear that much about illicit medical drugs. And yet it's a huge market, over $432 billion annually. Can you tell us a bit about this market and put it into context for us?
Yeah, Javier, thank you very much for having me. I think a little known fact among most people living in the United States is how large the counterfeit drug market is. As Javier said, over $400 billion. World Customs Organization would tell you that's more than illicit narcotics of heroin and cocaine combined. And here in Arizona particularly, if you think about the last time you went to a bodega or a flea market and you saw medicine from Mexico, the vast majority of that is counterfeit. In particular, we see children's cough syrup that contains ethanol, ethylene glycol, hydrogen peroxide. So by a show of hands, how many people knew that, right? We don't know that. And so what we see is the traffickers preying on vulnerable patients in underserved communities who don't have access to equitable health care. So we want to raise awareness about the danger, first off, and secondly, provide resources on how to buy medicine safely. So we see the fentanyl issue as a critical issue. It has raised awareness about counterfeit medicines. But counterfeit children's cough syrups, analgesics, cancer medicines, HIV medicines are awash in the United States. We need to be aware of that. We know how to buy those medicines safely and affordably. And I brought tools to share with people that we need to amplify that message and how to do so. Thank you, Javier.
Thank you, Aaron. Jonathan, from the Western Growers Association's perspective, how has the management of our immigration system most impacted agricultural operations in terms of labor, trade, and transportation?
Thanks, Javier, and thanks to the council for putting this event on. I think this is a very important conversation. I'm from Arizona originally. I work in the Washington, D.C. office now, but it's always good to be home, even if I have to sweat a little bit being here. Not just because I'm in front of you all today, but Western Growers, just by way of background, for those of you who don't know, we represent growers in the Western United States, as the name implies, but we represent fresh fruit and veg growers that make up, our members produce half of the fresh fruit and veg production in the U.S. and 2/3 of the tree nuts. If you're not aware, the fresh fruit and veg industry is very labor intensive. It's not easy work. It's very skilled work, but it's very hard work. So labor has long been the number one issue that we've worked on locally, but also in Washington, D.C. We've long worked on immigration reform in this space, comprehensive immigration reform in the Senate, more recently in the House on ag labor reform legislation. In this context, I think we kind of look at it in two different areas. Number one is, depending on how you ask, the estimates of those that are here working on farms is about 2 million plus in the US, and good estimates are about half of them are undocumented. So just let that sink in. The food security of this nation relies on 2 million in the workforce, half of which have undocumented status. So they're in a little bit of a limbo state, and that concerns a lot of our members. And that's one thing that we've worked on, is try to figure out stability for these folks so they can continue to provide food for our tables. The second thing, and we'll talk about it in more detail later, but is the H-2A guest worker program. It's been harder and harder to get folks to come work on the farms, domestic workers here. As you can imagine, it's not easy work. Particularly in Arizona, although a lot of it's down in Yuma in the wintertime, so it's not quite as hot as it is outside here today, but it's still not easy. Folks have been pushed to use the H-2A program, which is cumbersome and expensive. And over the years, I think the last 5 years or so, it's increased in use by about 65%. Just last year, I think the numbers are north of 300,000 for certified workers. So that was the need for additional workers in the agriculture field in the U.S. That's not going to slow down. Farmers and growers are between a rock and a hard place. There's nowhere else for them to turn. And so we're trying to make it easier, less cumbersome, more cost efficient to be able to continue to grow the food that we're supposed to eat, fresh fruit and veg.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that perspective. And it's funny, we, like you, have been proponents of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to immigration. And we hear from strawberry growers in California, citrus growers in Florida, meat and poultry processors in Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, all the way to dairy farmers. And all of those organizations, all of those industries are in a bit of a pickle, because it's clear to them that without immigrant labor, the entire industry falls down. So I hope that we have the kind of leadership that will be brave enough and courageous enough to do the right thing by our friends in the agricultural sector. So your perspective is incredibly important. Thanks for being here. Leah, when I approach people about the border, most view it as a political issue, or they try to push an agenda. What we're trying to do today is to break through the noise and kind of get to the facts as you panelists see it. As someone who is critically involved in keeping the lights on, in safeguarding our water supply and spurring economic development, what's your perspective on all of this?
Thank you, Javier, and thank you again for hosting this in Arizona. It's an important conversation to have. I mean, we need to secure our border. We have a humanitarian crisis beyond the issues that are going to be brought up by my fellow panelists today, and it's time for immigration reform. The connection I'll make, I guess, to our electric grid, or the work we do at the Corporation Commission, is really about the interconnectivity between Arizona and Mexico, to our south, California, New Mexico, and our northern states. Right now, people have already referenced the incredible heat we're facing. From a commission perspective, it's about energy reliability, ensuring those lights turn on, population growth, as that impacts Arizona in terms of immigration, what we can do to ensure that we have the right resource mix and the right resources in place. We also regulate water utilities, close to 400 of them. That plays an important role in a lot of the conversations happening throughout the state, as well as our border communities. You mentioned railroad and pipeline safety. So much of our infrastructure is impacted by this discussion. So I'm glad that I'm able to join you today.
Thank you for being here, Leah. We really appreciate your expertise. And, you know, it's funny, I'm a Texan, and, you know, as you well know, the power grid issue we had not too long ago, in that particular winter, over 100 people perished because our system frankly wasn't prepared. And I think it really brought to light the importance of commissions like yours and people like yourself to ensure that our tax dollars are being put in the right place to protect all people living in the U.S. And so your perspective is really important. Thanks for being here. Jonathan, obviously the BSA focuses on securing our borders. Not so obvious to some is that it means you are often dealing with human trafficking, drug trafficking, and the smuggling of illegal goods. Which of these impacts you most and why?
You know, as a father of 11, I worry about all of those things, and thank you for having us here today, and it's great to be able to see so many familiar faces and friends. Every day when I get up, I am concerned about the fentanyl coming across the border. I'm concerned about the illegal goods that make their way across. We've had overdoses. We lead the nation in fentanyl poisonings, but I think that our consciences need to be pricked a little bit when it comes to the human trafficking element. Being out on the border with Border Patrol and having an agent tell me when I've asked which of these units are actually families, and for him to tell me that they have been prohibited by the current administration from doing DNA testing on these people coming across and knowing full well that looking at these kids' faces, they don't want to be with the people who are bringing them across, and they are scared. We know that they're being trafficked. Recently, there was a movie making its way across the United States, The Sound of Freedom. I know many of those people that have worked with Tim Ballard. I've had the opportunity to be in Vietnam with them as they have scoped out places where they were going to go in and try to do that work. But the human trafficking element scares me every single day. Congressman Biggs sent a letter a few months ago asking for an accounting for more than 85,000 children that have been misplaced in federal foster care. That data is several months old. It is now north of 100,000. Where are these children, and who is accountable for them? This is what terrorizes me. I can't sleep at night because of the human trafficking element.
Thank you for that perspective, Jonathan. And it's funny, I couldn't agree more. I think as a nation, we get so preoccupied with the legalities and the regulation and legislation, and we forget that we're America.
I wanted to add, Senator Blackburn just recently introduced a bill to require that DNA testing and that it be put back into place, and I hope that's able to sail through and that we get full bipartisan support so that we know that these children are not being trafficked.
You'll have our support, I can guarantee it. I think that, we forget these are children. And as a parent, as I am, you're a little more prolific at it than I am. I only have 3 kids, but...
That's my work ethic.
I guess I'm a slouch, but what am I going to do? But seriously, I think we forget. We're the United States of America, and we can do better. So having your perspective here is important. Let me get back to you, Aaron. The sophistication of the cartels when it comes to the packaging of their counterfeit medicine has improved tremendously, frankly. Oftentimes, it's very difficult for the average layperson like myself to distinguish between a valid medicine and a fake. Can you give us some examples of what people can look for when trying to determine if a medicine is legitimate and if it's safe?
So that's a great question, and these traffickers didn't become billionaires by being dumb or poor at their business. I think a couple of very quick aids for people to identify counterfeit medicines begin with if it's packaged in a foreign language, it is not in English at all. If it's marketed for a foreign language, it is illegal in the United States. Beyond being illegal, it's likely counterfeit. When we see counterfeit medicines containing, as I said, hydrogen peroxide, ethylene glycol, ethanol, that's not good for anybody. So we at Boehringer Ingelheim strongly encourage patients to use the National Association Boards of Pharmacy Safe.Pharmacy program. If you simply go to Safe.Pharmacy, it will show you how to buy medicines online safely. If you're thinking about buying medicine online and you have a website, you put it into that program, it will tell you if it's authentic or rogue. The second thing is for patients who are struggling to afford their medicine, and we all recognize medicine is expensive. If you go to mat.org, it will show you if you qualify for discounted or even free medicine. So I encourage all of you to share this with your constituents, your friends and family, because surprisingly, many, many people qualify for discounted and free medicine, and that's the key. It is the cost of medicine for sure that drives people to flea markets and bodegas, as well as the immigration status that we've talked about. But there's no reason to be forced into that decision. There are places to buy safe medicine authentically and affordably by using those resources. As you pass out the door today, there's a little poster over the thermometer that has 2 QR codes. If you scan the QR code, it will take you right to the National Association Boards of Pharmacy Safe.Pharmacy initiative, and you can share that with your friends and constituents. Above that QR code is another code that is a brief 3-minute video that I did with the gentleman from Narcos. If you've watched Narcos on Netflix, old friends and partners of mine, and they talk about the dangers of counterfeit medicines. It also has Spanish subtitles in it, and it's a great resource for people who didn't know, wow, this is really dangerous. So thank you, Javier, for that good question.
Thank you, Aaron. Jonathan, I want to revisit from the immigration reform front. First of all, at the USHBC, we believe and we try to keep our view on immigration from an economic perspective. For us, immigration reform is an economic imperative for the continued well-being of our nation. As such, we believe that guest worker programs and visa reform should be a priority when we look at this very thorny issue, frankly. Do your constituents feel the same way we do? And what changes, in a bit more detail, would you like to see to the guest worker programs?
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of brought it up in that aspect, because immigration reform really is equal to, economic improvements. It's directly tied in all facets. As I mentioned, Western Growers has long been involved in immigration reform, but to kind of put it, I picked three key areas aside from streamlining and making it easier for growers to actually utilize the program. I wanted to focus on three kind of key areas if I could. One is wage inflation, another one is year-round access, and then finally one specific to Arizona that's on housing. The wage inflation issue is probably the top tier issue for most folks who are involved in the H-2A program. There's a part of the law that requires, it's called AWAR we call it, but it's adverse effect wage rate. The USDA does a survey of growers across the country. It's done regionally, but if you can imagine your place of work, if someone came from the government to ask you for a voluntary survey to ask what folks are paid, starting, first year folks who are entry level, supervisors, transportation, bundled those all together to get an average. And then next year, the minimum wage for your company would be that average. You can imagine that will necessarily escalate way higher than any other industry that's out there. That's a challenge to keep in business. We want some more. We don't mind that goes up with cost of inflation, but to have some states and regions go up by 25% in a given year is just not palatable. It's putting a lot of folks out of business. Year-round access, Javier, you mentioned this a little bit, but our friends in the dairy and other year-round sector industries do not have access to the H-2A program. In order to be a participant in the program, you have to have temporary and seasonal work. They face the same challenges with their workforce. They need stability and they need access to keep in business. And finally, something specific to Arizona, the H-2A program requires employers to provide housing for the workers, which makes sense. In Yuma, which hopefully all of us here know, and I have to repeat it in DC all the time, but Yuma provides 90-something% of the winter lettuce for the entire country. In Yuma, the proximity with the border, a lot of folks who come in the H-2A program to work live very close to the border. So they choose to stay with their families, their wives, their kids, their spouses in Mexico. They come across, if anybody's ever been down there at 4 o'clock in the morning and seen this, massive lines of people coming to work, it's incredible. But they, just like any of us here, would prefer to go home and live with their families, have dinner with their families at night. That housing requirement doesn't cease because they choose to go home. Something we've been fighting for Arizona specifically is to not have growers in Yuma waste money to hold these housing for workers that are never used. It's a huge savings for growers and for Arizona, and we're going to keep fighting for that. So that's something real specific to Arizona.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I think it's a fight very well worth having. And, as I mentioned earlier, and you just mentioned, the need is prolific. I remember distinctly talking to a gentleman from, I believe, Idaho, and he was a dairy farmer. And he said, for us, it's not a seasonal need. We need them in the dead of winter and the heat of summer. And he said, Javier, that cow isn't going to milk itself. And I thought, Bob, you're right. And he said, but I can't pay a native-born individual any amount of money to come do the job and the work that these people are doing. He said, so I hope that, Washington will listen, and I hope that we have people out there fighting on our behalf. So I think your fight is very well worth having, and we'll try to do everything we can to help. Leah, I know the ACC is very involved in utilities, water, pipelines, and railroads, among other things. What role does immigration play in essential industries like the ones that you guys are involved in?
Thank you, Javier. An important role. I mean, I think we see right now in the hottest time, the peak time here in Arizona of our temperatures, a lot of work done, and I applaud APS, SRP, TEP, and others, our Arizona utilities, in ensuring that we have the reliability, that energy reliability, to make sure that the lights stay on and the air conditioning works. It's life and death right now in Arizona if we don't have air conditioning, right? Immigration, whether legal or illegal, increases the numbers in the state. We need certainty, we need consistency. We work with our utility partners years in advance. They recently came in for summer preparedness meetings in March, energy reliability summits, and so forth. So the more consistency or assurance we have in terms of numbers, where people are, what their usage will be, this also, you could layer on the economic development conversation happening in our state. We've seen incredible growth in Arizona, semiconductor industry and others, a lot of the workforce needs, but certainly also the energy and water needs. So how we balance that with the flows of people in and out impacts certainly our important industries.
Thank you, Leah. Yeah, I imagine it's got to be quite a science to keep everything in balance. And it's funny, you mentioned the growth and you mentioned workers. I'm staying at the Westin, and I'm on like the 17th floor or the 14th floor. I'm somewhere in the Westin. And in the morning I open the curtains and I look down on a construction site, literally in front of me. And it must have been 5:30 in the morning. They were already out there. I imagine getting started early so that they can leave a little earlier because of the heat. I'm not sure. But I caught myself wondering how many of those people that were down there working with the cranes and on that construction site were of an immigrant background. It's probably going to get a little warm today. And yet there they are, building up Phoenix, building up Arizona, frankly, building up America. So I think having Americans like yourself that are willing to courageously look at this from a dispassionate perspective and just look at the needs of the nation and be thoughtful about what we do is critically important. So keep up that good work, Leah. Jonathan, at the Border Security Alliance, you defend local communities just like this one by securing our border, obviously. From what you've seen, how well equipped are we at the border, and do we have the resources to both process future citizens and keep the bad actors out?
I want to take a moment just to recognize the fact that so many elected officials across the country have come to Yuma, Arizona to look and see what we have on the ground, what's deployed, what's working well, and what's not. Most recently, Senator Sinema, and I see my good friend Austin here somewhere, but she led a bipartisan group of senators to come to Yuma and observe firsthand the tools that Border Patrol or state, local, and federal officials have in their toolbox to effectively combat the illegal entry into the United States. On our western front, because we have two fronts in Yuma, we have a western front and we have a southern front, and that western front borders Baja California, and that's where we have the majority of the people peaceably coming across. We don't necessarily have challenges other than they are the give-ups. In that region, the majority of the fence or the wall is complete. We have an old legacy surveillance system, which includes ground sensors as well as cameras. Under President Trump, they were integrating new technology with sensors, additional sensors and additional cameras along the western border and also along our southern border, in addition to having the physical barrier. Just remember, all of those are tools in the toolbox. They give operational control, not total control of the border. Sad to see that on our southern border, where we have bad actors, the fentanyl and the human trafficking element surging at the border, and where we had almost 80 deaths in the desert last year, all of those sensors and those surveillance cameras have been removed under this current administration. Therefore, taking tools out of the toolbox from state, local, and federal officials to effectively combat everything that we're talking about here today, the illegal entry into the United States in all forms. That's frustrating for us on the ground. And as I have taken our elected officials to the border so that they can observe firsthand, each one of them has reiterated to me, no matter where they are coming from in the United States, it's not a Yuma problem, it's not an Arizona problem, it is a national problem. Border security is national security, which leads to food security and every other form of security. We need to finalize and complete and give all of the tools to our law enforcement officials so that they can then keep us safe. It's our first line of defense in keeping our families and this nation safe. And I appreciate Jonathan mentioning the Yuma commitment to agriculture. It's one of our three pillars, aside from the military. Military has been affected with people coming across the bombing range, so they effectively have to shut down live fire operations. The Marine Corps holds its Top Gun in Yuma every 6 months. It's called WTI, Weapons and Tactical Instruction. They shut down exercises when you have thousands of Marines engaging in a simulation of combat and actually dropping real live fire munitions as people are walking across the border. And in talking with them and in talking with some of the people who come across, that's done intentional. The cartels are targeting these areas, pushing people across where we don't have the resources, or it's interfering with our national security as well.
It's funny you mentioned the cartels. It's like they just continue to morph into wherever they can, find the path, wherever they can disrupt. The sophistication of the cartels is stunning. I wonder, when you lead delegations, do you get Democrat members of Congress to come and visit with you and go to the border and see what's actually going on?
I've had 2 Democrats, registered Democrats, come. Senator Kelly, appreciate him being there, and every time I call him, he's responsive. He'll even come off the floor and listen to me complain about what's being done and what's not being done. And the other one is Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr., who I had a month and a half ago, and he spent 3 days with me looking for solutions to bring to the table so that it's a bipartisan effort. But other than those 2, no.
Hopefully we can get some people to sign up to come take a look at what's actually going on. Aaron, I'll come back to you. The illicit medical drug market, as I mentioned earlier, has grown to over $430 billion annually as an industry. Sadly, it targets immigrants and our most vulnerable Americans, communities that are desperate, frankly. You spoke earlier a bit about resources for our communities. Can you provide a little bit more detail about what those resources could look like and how we could make them a reality?
Yeah, I want to add one thing to what Jonathan was saying, and I think the counterfeit drug issue is also a humanitarian crisis. When you have people in America who can't get access to safe medicine, that's a crisis. And for anybody here who has had a loved one, family member suffer from cancer, I want you to think about when you get a counterfeit medicine that you're receiving so that you can tolerate chemotherapy for breast cancer. The medicine is counterfeit. Therefore, they reduce your chemotherapy and you die of a treatable form of breast cancer. That's unacceptable in America. The other thing is we now see the Mexican cartels, the Sinaloa cartel, the New Generation Jalisco cartel, MS-13, gangs from Guatemala, trafficking in counterfeit medicines. So they're serious about what they're doing. And we, on the other hand, are a vulnerable country with some of our most productive citizens who don't have access to medicine. And so, as Javi mentioned, if people are down on the street at 4:30 in the morning at the 100-degree heat working, and they're sick, or their loved ones are sick, and they're not getting better, you're not focused on your job. You can't do your job well. You can't support your family. So as I mentioned, the NABP Safe.Pharmacy program allows you to buy medicine online safely. MAT.org, regardless of your immigration status, you can find medicine at discounted or free prices through MAT.org. That is a solution that most people are unaware of, that we need to raise awareness about, and that people can utilize to protect their families and ensure the success and sustainability of the Latino community in America.
Thank you, Aaron. So this question I'd like to ask of the three panelists that are from Arizona. You and your stakeholders, and this is for all three of you, you and your stakeholders understand how things have to work in a border state. As such, I imagine that U.S.-Mexico relations have an impact on your respective areas of focus. In fact, Arizona exports over $9 billion to Mexico every year, making Mexico your #1 export market. Concurrently, Arizona imports over $11 billion from Mexico every year, making them your #1 import partner. Bottom line, Mexico is Arizona's #1 trade partner and critically important to the continued well-being of the state. But things between the U.S. and Mexico have been a bit strained recently. By way of example, the 50% tariff on white corn imports from the U.S. recently announced by the Mexican government. I'd like to hear from everybody, all three of you. How do U.S.-Mexico relations impact your work and your constituents? And Jonathan, I'll start with you.
Appreciate that question. You mentioned tariffs, you mentioned the imports and exports for the fresh fruit and veg industry. Our exports are, Canada's #1, Mexico's #2, and then it's kind of everybody else. So Mexico is hugely important. Tariffs are an issue, with someone being so close in proximity, there's going to be bumps in the relationship along the way, but in order to see through, alleged dumping issues, tariffs, transportation issues at the border in particular, we really need to prioritize that relationship, both at the federal level, but in particular here, Arizona stands to benefit so much from that relationship, import and export. And I think, Arizona does a good job of that, but that's something we can't lose sight of, both from our federal elected officials, but our governor and others here in the state. So I think we got to keep the pressure on for that.
Thank you, Jonathan. Leah, your answer to the same question.
Yeah, thank you, Javier. And I think I'm going to answer this with my prior business experience hat on as president of the Tucson Hispanic Chamber for almost 10 years. Mexico is a vital partner. We have a complex relationship. Beyond what we've talked about here on the panel, at the Tucson Hispanic Chamber, we really embrace kind of the bicultural, bilingual region that was southern Arizona and northern Mexico. So we knew that from a business perspective, to really succeed and grow, a lot of the wealth, a lot of the larger businesses were across the border in Sonora. So it was important for us to build relationships, build partnerships, and that continues to this day. From an Arizona perspective, I think we could be doing more. I think our Arizona-Mexico Commission plays an important role in this relationship. I also think in each of our different industries that are represented here in the room today, and certainly in growers and the Grow Association, we need to do what we can to establish even stronger relationships, I think, in Mexico, while we're having this very hard discussion of humanitarian crisis along the border and immigration reform needed. But it's a very important relationship we need to maintain.
Thank you, Leah. Jonathan, your thoughts?
I'm proud of the work that we have done over the last few years with the Arizona-Mexico Commission. Governor Ducey was fond of repeating something that has been said many times: if we're going to be neighbors, let's be good neighbors. And that's extremely critical. I've got two board members here, Jaime and Russ, who served on the commission with me as well for many years, where we engaged in a daily basis with our neighbors in Mexico. It's a mega region. That was one of the pushes of Governor Ducey, that together we would lift both regions. When you create a vacuum in one, it destabilizes another, and there are unintended consequences. So let's lift the region together, creating jobs and providing security and being good neighbors and engaging in the relationships. I love the different commissions that we had in the Arizona-Mexico Commission because it focused on so many different factors of our life to where anybody could engage in those areas. I think that in order to move ahead, that it's going to take a coordinated approach working with our friends in Mexico, specifically targeting each one of those things that we've discussed today. There has to be a will, and then here in the United States, we've got to decrease demand for some of the illegal activities that are happening. We need to look at a law enforcement perspective. One of the other challenges that we see is the importation of other illicit goods. As I drive home daily from school or pass by the schools picking up kids, I see younger kids that are working with inhalers and the vaping, and we know that that is coming in through Mexico from China and other areas. I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I just think about the overall approach, and it has to be holistic, and everybody has to be engaged, and we've got to work together. And I think that the foremost leader in that was the Arizona-Mexico Commission, to which we were members for several years.
Thank you, Jonathan, and frankly, all three of you. It's interesting, and I'm very heartened by the fact that, you know, I think all three of you take as Jonathan called it, a regional perspective and a binational approach to this thing. And the notion of being good neighbors, I think, speaks to the heart of Arizonans. It is a challenging relationship, but it occurs to me, and I'm by no means an expert on this, but it occurs to me, having visited Israel more than once, that sometimes we forget that having a neighbor that may not have your best interests at heart is a very different thing. We never have to worry about that with Mexico. And in my perspective, from where I'm looking at it, you know, those are the table stakes. We're good neighbors first. And obviously it's a complicated relationship, but the professionalism that all of you have illustrated and the way you've articulated the facts, it's courageous. And it's very, very educational. So I have to say thank you. So Aaron, Jonathan, Leah, and other Jonathan, we appreciate you offering your time and perspective in this critical dialogue. I commend you for your unwavering support of Arizona, our economy, and frankly, our nation. So, ladies and gentlemen, please stand and help me thank our panelists as we wrap this thing up. As the son of immigrants, a former migrant farm worker myself, and a native of a border state, I have a unique appreciation for immigration reform. Sadly, I think the only thing more broken than our immigration system is our Congress. Many of our elected officials on both sides of the aisle have used this broken system as a political tool to drum up support for their party, or worse yet, to stir up resentment, hatred, and fear. But I think that the people of Arizona know better, and I think the nation would do well to listen to the people of Arizona. We need our elected officials to come together and create real change, not more political theater. In short, we need them to do their damn job. And who better to inform our strategy than all of you, the very Americans that are living right here, right on the border. Frankly, the Americans who are impacted the most. So with that, I urge all of us to continue to stay involved and continue to make our voices heard. On behalf of the USHBC, our guests at Boehringer Ingelheim, Border Security Alliance, the Western Growers Association, and the Arizona Corporations Commission, thank you. If you would like to stay for our conversation with Senator Kyrsten Sinema, please enjoy a short 10-minute intermission before we get started. Thanks, everyone. It's a wrap for this one. Appreciate it.